Okay, I think we are live. Let's just have a few seconds so that you guys can join us. Hello, hello. It's 6 o'clock, so we will be starting our live event in a few moments. Just let us know if you can hear us and if you can see us. Okay, I can see first viewers joining us. Hi guys, great to have you here. Let us know if you can see us and let us know if we are streaming with no problems. We are live on Facebook and we are live on our YouTube channel. So we'll be starting in a few moments. Just let us wait for more viewers to come and we'll be going live. As you can see, we are doing the first online Techbite mobile meetup. So just give us a few seconds. Okay, and I think we can start our live show. Hi guys, great to have you here. This is the first edition of Techbite Mobile Meetup. We are doing it online. We are hoping to go back to live meetings very soon, but right now we are joined by our great speaker online. And please let me tell you a few words about our event because this is the first online edition. So we are a community. We are creating a community who want to inspire each other, who want to learn new things and want to grow together. As you can see, our community brings together developers of mobile applications, iOS and Android applications. So I am welcoming you on behalf of our team leader, who is visible on your screens right now. This is Paweł Niewęgłowski, leader of Techbite. This is actually how our events used to look like when we were meeting live. We are hoping to go back to that setting very soon. Right now, we are meeting online. As you can see, lots of people joining us during our live events. This is Campus Warsaw. We were meeting in Warsaw and some speakers. And this is Paweł a good few years ago. Okay, and this is our main sponsor today. This is Backbase. Thank you so much, Backbase, for being with us, for supporting our community. Guys, please be sure to check out their website. Maybe you can find something for yourself. Maybe they are hiring. Check this out. Okay, and about our speaker today. As you can see, this is Alex Żukowicz, who will be talking about UI testing of Jetpack Compose apps. Alex has been developing Android since 2011. Currently, he is working for Backbase, our main sponsor. He is a public speaker in Europe and software enthusiast with a passion for technologies. He shares his thoughts and experiences on the private technical blog. You can find it on alexzh.com. I'm sure that Alex will show you the link to his blog during his presentation. So right now I'm adding Alex to our stream. Hello, Alex. Great to have you here.
Hello, thank you for having me here.
Hi. I will.
Yeah, can you
Okay.
hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you so much for being with us. Okay, just let me give our viewers a few things about the Q&A session, and we will be giving you the microphone, and we will be leaving you with our viewers. So yeah, just a few more things. Be sure to leave your questions. This is an open event. We want you guys to participate in that event. We want you guys to grow and develop with us. So if you have any questions, anything particularly interesting for you guys during this session, be sure to leave your questions in the comments on our Facebook and in the private chat, and we will be sharing those questions during the Q&A session. We'll be asking our speaker once he is done with his presentation. So now just let me add Alex's presentation to the screen. Okay, once again, Alex, great to have you here with us on TechBite Mobile Meetup. So have fun and see you in around an hour.
See you. So, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this meetup and to my talk. So today I would like to talk about UI testing in Jetpack Compose. However, many topics from this talk will be applicable for all platforms. So here will be part of the talk about Jetpack Compose in details and part of the talk about best practices recommendation and how we can complexly test our application. So let me start, and I want to start. Uh, I want to start. Sorry. I want to start with a moment when usually we should start test our applications. So many people tell you that we should start from the very beginning when we just start the project. Unfortunately, it's more about theory and not always a practice. Because very often we have different limitations. Sometimes it can be budget, sometimes it can be time to market, sometimes we just want to release as fast as we can. So, and in practice, very often we start at different type of test for our product when it's actually bigger, when it's growing, and when it's not so easy to check all cases manually. Of course, here I speak mostly about user interface tests. So, and let's imagine that you have even small application with couple of screens. So usually, if you have such pretty simple application, you can cover it with manual verification like in 10 minutes. However, later on, you can assume, okay, we need to support couple more languages. We need to support different color themes at minimum light and day, night and day mode. So as we can see, and when we try to support everything, so our screen just multiplies in amount because we should check every screen in different color themes, in different languages, etc. Especially when we already start edit left to right and right to left orientations, it's more and more complicated to check. Maybe it's not even complicated, but we should spend much more time for checking it. So before speaking about different approaches, how can we do UI testing? I want to talk a bit more about what does it mean a good test case for us. And here, of course, it's not only UI tests. So first of all, our test case should be stable. So we don't, we really want to have similar results every time when we run the test. So we don't have any flakiness in our test. Of course, we should have fast feedback loop. So when we run our test, we don't want to wait half an hour or an hour just to get results. We want to get them as fast as possible. Of course, usually when we speak about any native framework for testing user interface for any platform, what is usually happened is that we have these frameworks usually are pretty direct. So find something on the screen, do some action with it. Find something on the screen, check that it's displayed on the screen, it has some text or something like this. Of course, it's pretty simple to understand, but in practice, it's really complicated to read such tests because usually we don't know on which screen we are right now, which button do we click, etc. So it's easy when you have when you see a test case, and on other hand you have just your mobile phone with application, and you can say, oh, okay, right now I'm on this screen, I do that action and go to another screen. So we should put more attention to readability, and of course every of our test case should be independent. Because if you have one preparational test case which downloads some data from the network or do some other operations, pre-populate database, etc., and if this test case will fail, all your other tests also will fail. And of course, it's not so good. For people who work in a project and decide to do it in this way, it's much simpler because they know, okay, maybe if all test case from one module failed, maybe it's because of preparation step fail. But for a new person, it will be not so obvious. And this person can spend much more time if you have such workarounds. When we talk about any application which has user interface, we should cover both part of our application. So first of all, we should cover interaction. When we click on the screen, when we click on the button on the screen, we go to another screen. Or we also should be sure that our application looks perfectly. So let's take a look at few examples. And right now, when we talk about interaction, so we on the profile screen, and we know that if user log out, we can see create account and login options. We click login, go to login screen, enter our credential, we'll logged in successfully, we come back to the profile screen, and we know that we can see an username, email address, and possibility to log out. So everything is clear here. But when we talk about pixel perfectness, when we try to check it in the same way, we can see that on both of the screenshots they are different. However, they still contain the same data. So as you can see, if we will try to write a usual test case, which you can see in many guides, as example, try to write test case in Espresso or any other framework, we can see, okay, do I see user indicator? Yes. Do I see username? Yes. Do I see email indicator and email? Also yes. But we can see that something went wrong with it. And we have some visual transformations and some spacing between our email. So as you can see, we also should check that our application still look perfectly. And ideally, we also want to be notified by our test that something changed, and most probably we should change it. If we did it intentionally, it's fine, but it always will be great to be notified by our test case. So here I collected most popular use cases, and we can explore which type of testing we can apply for different use cases. So when we want to interact with our screen, of course, here we talk about interaction. When we check our UI components, which is usually put inside some design systems, which applied for one or more projects, we can usually do here pixel perfectness verification and interaction. Because usually some UI component they much more complicated than just a label or just a button with one state. Because later on, we can have buttons that when we click on this button, the loading indicator appears, etc. So in these cases, sometimes we also should check that our component change state after clicking on it or do some transformation. So the next such cases like supporting multiple languages, supporting left to right and right to left orientation, supporting different font sizes, screen sizes, different color themes, etc. We can verify with pixel perfectness. And of course, when we talk about permission testing, which is pretty important use case from my side, we should do only interaction. Because with permission testing, when you can easily find many examples when people use just grant permission rule, grant all permission, and everything fine. Unfortunately, it's only one small test case. Because when we talk about runtime permissions, we should remember that we should cover use case when we have all permissions, we have no permissions at all, or we have only one permissions. And in all of these cases, our application should work perfectly without any crashes or any issues. So it's really important to check different combinations of permissions and still to be sure that our application works well without any problem. And right now, I want to introduce to you different approaches which we can apply for test our application efficiently. So it's screenshot testing, functional testing, and end-to-end testing. So when we talk about screenshot test, as we showed before, we need some way of pixel perfectness verification that our application still looks good after our changes. And as you can see on the screenshots, we have additional spacing before all time for the screen. So in this case, if it was done by mistake, of course we should fix it. And screenshot test here will notify us about some issue. When we talk about functional test, here we're not really interested in any interaction with proper backend, with sometimes with database or with any other environment. Here we usually are interested that our application, our user interface react in a good way and in a proper way on the data which we get, let's say, from the backend. For simplification, usually here we just use any type of fake data. It can be fake data, it can be mock responses, etc. And of course, when we talk about end-to-end test cases, here we usually use proper backend, we use a proper database, etc. However, here, when we talk about real end-to-end test cases, we should remember that during end-to-end test case, we change the state of our application or state of our device. And here, what is important that state of the application of the device and of the environment should be the same before and after test case. So it's really important remember to clean up everything what you changed and the end of the test case. And when we talk about efficiency in our user interface verification and how our application works in general, we should combine end-to-end test case, functional test, and screenshot test. And as you can see from this image, the smaller amount we will have of end-to-end test case, because usually they can be long, they are flaky, they interact with real environment. Usually about 10 from 10 to 20% is enough. And later on we have functional and screenshot test. So right now let's try to check if all of this is needed for us, or we can just exclude one of type of test case and it still will be much better. So we can simplify life for us. So if we try to exclude end-to-end test case and we will check different states, use only fake data for functional test case and screenshots, everything everything at the beginning will be fine, because we can check all data with functional tests. We can check that our application looks perfectly with user interface test. So in this case, from one side it looks good and it's much faster than having end-to-end test, but from other side it wouldn't be so good, because when you use functional test you usually use mock data or some fake data. And here you can have a situation that when you run all your tests, your application works well. But new version of backend removed one field or added new field. And in this case, you cannot really find this issue by running your tests, because you always use only fake data. So it's really easy to be desynchronized with your real environment. That's why for sure we need to have small amount of end-to-end test case, just to test many cases with fake data, but also check some cases with real data, with real environment, with real backend, with real instance of database, etc. So we can try to exclude functional tests. So we can exclude them, but in this case, we should have much more end-to-end test case. And in this case, it can be a bit problematic, because end-to-end test case will be much longer. So our execution times will increase. In addition to it, our test will be more fragile. So they wouldn't be so stable as they can be when we use combination of end-to-end test case, functional test, and screenshot test. And as we saw, if we want to cover any visual changes and transformation and be notified by our test cases, we also should have screenshot tests. So ideal way is to combine all of these approaches, and in this case, we can test our product efficiently and much faster than if we try to exclude, let's say, functional test, and our test will check real environment if we will have end-to-end test cases. So right now I want to talk a bit more about state of Android development and testing, because right now we have Jetpack Compose and a lot of stuff also changing because of this technology. However, I want to start from the very beginning. So everything was pretty easy and simple when we had only activity at the beginning of Android operation system. So activity is the entry point to any application. So if your application have user interface, you should still have an activity. And when we had only activity, it was super simple because we had just a lot of activities. And this is all. Later on, fragment was introduced. And in this case, Uh, we had we had one issue. We didn't had good recommendation. What should we use? Should we use activities, and how should we combine it with a fragment? And to be honest, quality of fragments that time was not so good. So we had a couple of groups of people. So one group of people just completely ignore fragments and still use activities, only activities in this project. Another group of people try to have one activity and multiple fragments. And the third group of people try to have multiple activities, multiple fragments, use fragments only when it's needed. At the end, in the project, different features and different functionalities was implemented in completely different way. So in this case, it wasn't so good, especially for new joiners. And right now we have Jetpack Compose. And with Jetpack Compose, everything started to be even more complicated because let's talk about composable function. So composable function can be, let's say, small button on the screen, can be a couple of UI components which is grouped together, can be one screen or can be even multiple screen. And it's the same composable function. So we should know how to cover all the cases because different application, different project, different part of the application can be implemented differently. So let's take a look and check how can we start our any activity in our test case. So we can use activity scenario.launch. We can put our main activity, we can put our main activity with different parameters, and we can move to any specific state if we want to check some specific behavior of our activity. When we talk about launching fragment, as you can see from the API, we just put the fragment. We put fragment factory and we put a state of our application. So as you can see, we don't have activity here. However, any entry point for any UI test, it's always activity. So under the hood, our fragment will be added to the activity because during compilation, empty fragment activity will be added to Android manifest, of course, only for your UI test. And it means that first of all, empty fragment activity will be launched, and later on our fragment will be added to this empty activity. And when we talk about compose content test rule, so here we have a function create compose rule. It's return as instance of the screen. We can add any content which can be composable, a small composable function like a button, or huge stuff like a login screen. And later on, we can start testing it. But we should remember to add a UI test manifest library to the project. And when we edit it, during compilation, component activity will be added to Android manifest, and initially our component activity will be launched, and later on our composable function will be added to this activity. So right now, let's go a bit further and speak a bit more about difference between traditional views, which is our traditional approach, which we use many years, and Jetpack Compose. First of all, when we talk about the views, we had view hierarchy, which is called view tree. Right now with Jetpack Compose, instead of view tree, we have node trees, and they can be different. When we use view, all or almost all views have IDs, and right now we don't need IDs at all. However, for testing, also Google introduced a test tag, and people say, okay, right now, if we want to test anything, we should use test tag. No, please not use test tag always. We can easily avoid test tag and not add something which is needed only for test cases, but we should add it to production code. So During this talk, we will talk about replacement of the test tag. So it's not like ideal solution which should be used. When we talk about view, we have attributes, which with Jetpack Compose was replaced to semantic properties, and really huge changes about views and Espresso, let's say, use only a runtime clock, and Compose UI test framework use virtual clock, which give us some benefits, and we will talk about it also. So right now, it will be Android specific section, and we will talk how can we test Jetpack Compose code. So let's take a look at simple example. Here at the beginning of our test suite, we create compose test rule. Later on, we set some specific content. In our case, it's subscribe box component. And later on, we try to find the element. So for it, we need matcher. In this case, we use has test tag, put our test tag, and it's wrap everything inside a finder. So finder help us to find specific node by the specific matcher. Later on, we can do some actions with it, like perform click, or we can enter any text by perform text input. And later on, we can verify that something changed on the screen, something displayed on the screen, etc. However, what is really important when we talk about Jetpack Compose testing is understanding what is node and which node tree can we have. So when we talk about node trees, we have two of them. We have merge node tree and unmerged node tree. And it's super important topic when we talk about testing Jetpack Compose application. Because as you can see, when we talk about merge node tree and we try to analyze get node tree, get merge node tree for and unmerge node tree for the same screen, this tree will look like differently. So when we talk about merge node tree, we have node 1, it's for the screen, and node 2 for the whole button, which include an image and some text, and of course content description. When we talk about unmerged node tree, we can have node 1 for the screen, node 2 for the button, but as you can see, this button, this node 2 doesn't have any information about image, about content description for the image, and about the text. So we can print, we can log both of these node trees to the console using print to log function with some tag, or we can also get this information from Layout Inspector, which is part of Android Studio. And if we try to write similar test case, when we try to find text node by text, in one case we will execute it on merge node tree, and in another test case we will execute it in unmerged node tree. We can see that for merge node tree we will find node 2, and as we can see, node 2 has action on click. So this command will pass for merge node tree. However, if we try to find the same element for unmerged node tree, to do it inside on node, we should use parameter use unmerged tree equals true. In this case, when we try to find node by text, we will find node 5. And of course, as you can see, node 5 doesn't have any actions like on click. So if we will execute this almost the same amount of code for merge and unmerged node tree, we will have different results. So it's pretty important to understand difference between different trees and know when you want to apply one or another one. And one more benefit of Compose UI test comparing with Espresso, that previously when we use onView with any matcher like has text, and when more than one result was found, Espresso was failed because only one result can be found. And right now we have two different functions. It's on all nodes and on node. So On all nodes return collection of the nodes, and on node return only one node. And of course, if you use on node and was found more than one element, you also will have a crash. When we talk about on all nodes, it returned for us collection of element. We can use for it, work with it within as it's an array. So we can use index here. We also can combine our finder with a specific matchers, and this framework do it a lot. And instead of on all nodes with has content description matcher, we already have a couple of predefined functions like on all nodes with content description, on all nodes with text, etc. So as you can see, they try to simplify it a bit and has a less calls of functions inside functions when we compare it with Express. So let's take a look at the next example. So usually, and as you saw on the previous screen, we always hard-code string values. And it's always the case when you use a create compose rule. Because when you do it, create compose rule functions return content compose test rule class, and this class doesn't have any activity, any access to the activity. However, when we talk about when we use function create Android compose rule, it's returned another type which already has access to the activity. And of course, if we have access to the activity, we can easily get any string from the activity instance. So in this case, with really small changes, you can get access to the activity and of course use string resources instead of string. So just small explanation for less experienced people. So the best practice is to use the resources because you can have translation to different languages. So let's imagine your application support English and Polish languages, and you forget to set your device for English and try and run all your tests when your device has the Polish language set. So in this case, all your tests will fail because you're looking for English or any other language hard-coded translations. However, when you use resources, your application will get string for the specific language. So in this case, it will be much simpler. You will have less issues if you use resources. And right now, one pretty big change when we talk about comparing Jetpack Compose and native view widgets. So when we talk about Jetpack Compose and when we talk about checkbox, the checkbox it's only checkbox indicator without any text. The same for radio button, the same for switch component. So in native widgets, checkbox has checkbox indicator plus a label, and right now it's two completely different components. To combine them and have it as a one component, we need to wrap it inside the row. So we will have row, and inside row we will have checkbox and a text. The first problem which we have is accessibility, because by default inside accessibility checkbox it's only indicator. So to fix this sorry. I hope you can see the presentation right now. So in this case, what can we do? We can use our role attribute and apply this role attribute to the whole row. So when we will apply it, TalkBack will understand that whole row it's radio button in this case, or it's checkbox depending on the role which you pass. And it also helps us with during UI testing, because during UI testing, what can we do? We can try to find, we can try to find uh, items on the screen based on role. So for it, we have two different options. The first option is to create custom semantic matchers, and this semantic matcher will find all items for the specific role. The other approach, how we can replace and don't use this semantic matcher, we can just use exact exact properties. So in this case, we can find any semantic property with this method instead of creating a semantic matcher. In this case, I just show you how to create semantic matcher. And later on, when we find our roles, we also want to be sure that this component has a specific text. So in this case, we find a node which has which has role as radio button, and it has a specific text. So when we find it, we just click on it, and we can be sure that everything works properly without any problem. So, of course, we cannot create real application without interaction with the backend. So when we want to wait some data until some data will be loaded, when we want to wait until a request in database will be executed, we need to wait some time. So inside Espresso, we had specific function for it. So a specific mechanism for it. It was called idling resources. When we talk about UI automator, we have something which is called wait, when we can put timeout. And here we have wait until. By default, it has timeout 1 second. And what it do, it just check what you want to wait. And the main benefit of wait until method, that wait until method recheck it every 10 milliseconds, because Espresso and UI automator recheck it every second. So in this case, wait until method will be much faster than any alternative from native frameworks from Google. And later on, when we wait, we can do the next steps. And right now, more interesting question. So here I use ViewPager. And I use ViewPager from the Accompanies library. And somehow we want to check that we have 3 chapters. So first of all, if we want to do any swipe, we should find the node. And of course, the simplest solution here, it will be use test tag for our ViewPager. However, we want to try to avoid it. So when we analyzed all the nodes which we have on the screen, just printing a node tree to the console or just using layout inspector, we found that our ViewPager has semantic property selectable group. In this case, we can create a simple functions which will find node by our semantic properties, and we have function key is defined. So when we use key is defined, we will find node which has some semantic property. In this case, in our case, it's semantic property dot selectable group. So if we will do it, we will find our ViewPager, and later on we can do different swipes on this ViewPager. And as you can see, if you analyze your node tree, you can easily avoid of using test tag very often. Maybe in some specific cases, you still need to use it, but in many generic cases, you can easily find a replacement for has test tag modifier. And right now, a couple of interesting examples about a virtual timer, which we have from a Compose UI test library. So first of all, right now, we can enable and disable synchronization. And one of the main benefits was having synchronization in Espresso. So why do we want to enable and disable it? We will talk about it in the next slide. The next benefit is that we can advance our time by specific duration. So let's try to imagine a really weird example. So in this example, we have super long animation for 50 seconds. And of course, when we use some frameworks and we have runtime clock, we should wait all 50 seconds just to this animation will be over. However, when we use Compose UI test, we can just advance time by 50 seconds, and all this time will happen immediately. So your test will be super short, and you don't need to wait time of your animation. The next thing which we can still do, we can use idling resources. We have wait until functions. If we need to wait for some data from the backend, from the database, from different environment, etc., etc. And right now, let's explore one of benefits of which we can have when we talk about disabling synchronization. So when we disabling synchronization, what we can do, we can test our animations. So first of all, the function main clock dot auto advanced false, it means disabling synchronization. We can do the screenshot at the first frame. The next step, we can advanced time by a specific duration, in this case 150 milliseconds, do another screenshot, advanced time even more, do another screenshot, and in this case we can do as many screenshots as we need. So I don't try to say that you always need to test all animations in your application. However, let's assume you're building for parcel tracker, and when you get some data, you show some beautiful animation. And in this case, 90% of the time when user use your application, clicking on the link on the web and your applications appear, a user sees these beautiful animations. Later on, he sees that your parcel will be delivered tomorrow. So this animation most probably is pretty important for your application. And if it's a case, this animation should be tested because we want to be sure that our animation always work properly. We don't have any issue on it because it's pretty main part of our application. So it's pretty important to test it. And when we already start talking about screenshot test in practice, for which components we can do screenshots. So first of all, it can be different UI components. Let's say it can be a loading button with when we check different state. It can be month, week calendar, or any other more complicated or less complicated views, and of course the screens. And right now, I would like to introduce few new tools for you, maybe not new for some of you, but so the first one is Android UI testing utils. And this is a really great library which allow you to start your fragment, your activity, your composable function with specific requirements. So you can set different locale, you can already predefine light and dark mode, different display sizes, screen sizes, etc., font sizes. And the next tool is test parameter injector. It's a good entry point for parameterized test. And these functions work with different primitives, strings, enums, etc. So let's say if you have a couple of values in your enum, it will run as the same test with all parameters from this enum. So let's take a look at example. And here we have pretty simple test case, and here we use two test parameters. And this both of them are just enums. Font size has four values like small, normal, large, and largest, if I remember correctly. And then another parameter is UI mode, which is also has two values. It's day and night. So as you can see later on, we applied our values inside our test case. So we set font size and set our value from our parameters, and we check and we set UI mode also. And what is pretty important to remember is that we should uh, put these values or transform a value of the enums and put them into the file name for our future screenshot. Because it's pretty important. Otherwise, one screenshot will replace your previous screenshot. So it's pretty important use unique name for every value. And when we run this test, we will get 8 screenshots. So because we have 4 different font sizes and we have 2 different color themes. So we can get four different screenshots for light color theme and four screenshots with different font sizes for dark color theme. So as you can see, just with one test case, we can already check multiple scenarios. And right now, I want to add a couple of words about testing hybrid applications. So first of all, we can combine multiple framework in a test, especially when you add some of the composable functions on the fragment. So we can start the fragment with, let's say, a function launch fragment in container. Later on, with Espresso, we can do some interaction, click to some button, let's say move to another screen and start testing Jetpack Compose code with Compose UI test library. However, you should remember that Espresso and UI Automator can find nodes on the screen by text and content description, only by these two properties. But if you need something simple, you can still use Espresso and find your nodes, do some actions, etc., only with Espresso, or let's say UI Automator or any Espresso-based framework. The next thing is that you can combine multiple approaches, because if you want to do screenshot testing, you don't need Compose. You can test your application and screen without any Jetpack Compose code with any screenshot testing. We have 4 big libraries which are pretty popular. One is called Shot, one from Facebook, one from Spotify, and right now one from Dropbox. And I highly recommend increase readability of your test case in introducing domain-specific language. Or if you use frameworks like Espresso or Kakao, you already will have some abstraction on top of the native frameworks. And right now, I want to share a couple of recommendations and best practices, which I highly recommend to use when you create any type of test. So first of all, I highly recommend to use multiple small tests instead of one big test. First of all, it will be much more stable. Many small tests will be much more stable because instead of using end-to-end tests, you can use for some cases functional tests, screenshot tests, which are executed much faster than end-to-end test case, that they also much more stable than an end-to-end test, etc. I highly recommend have all independent test cases. If you want to do something, you do it at the beginning of the test and clean up it. If you really need some data, maybe you can use functional test and use fake data for this test and have only limited amount of tests which will use real data, but they will cover basic scenarios. I highly recommend don't use slips in your test case. It sounds really obvious, but when I check assignments for different companies, I saw that if people use screenshot test, that often use sleep just to wait until they get data from the database, data from the network, etc. We have good alternative. We have idle resources in Espresso and Jetpack Compose. We have wait until in Compose UI test library for Jetpack Compose. We have wait methods in UI Automator, and many Espresso-based framework can use any of this technology. And I highly recommend learn your tools. Spend more attention to learning tools for test automation, because very often developers prefer to learn how different libraries works which are needed for the development. Let's say coroutines, RX Java, retrofit, OK HTTP, etc. And they spend more time to learn how this tool works. But very often they didn't spend a lot of attention to learning different testing tools, especially for UI test, because many developers prefer still use have only unit test. However, let's say if you want to check pixel perfectness, of course you cannot really do it with unit tests. And I highly recommend explore more about UI test, introduced different ways of verification to your application. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to have a discussion and answer to your questions. Thank you for your time. It was great to be here.
Thank you so much, Alex. And we have some questions, so let me show them on the screen. The first one I think was this one. What about callbacks? What is the best way to use compose values in fragments, especially if they are in async calculations?
So here it really depends which type of test do you want to use. Because if you want to use a functional test, you can just return a set of fake data from your repository. Let's say if you I will talk about generic architecture. Of course, every application is different, but usually we have some source of data. We have some data sources. We have some repositories, use cases, etc. So we can return set of fake data from your repository, from your use case, and show them on the screen. Because very often with unit test, you check how your different layers work between each other. And for UI test and for checking that data show on the UI, we can just use fake data. And for some cases, we can use end-to-end test cases. But for for going it in an efficient way, very often we have many functional tests which use fake data. And in this case, it's not a problem at all.
Okay, now we have a question from our one of our YouTube viewers. Rafał is asking, what kind of test should I use for testing navigation?
So for testing navigation, you can use functional test. You can use just a multiple. You can just have multiple screens, because in this case, you don't really ask for backend. You don't really talk with database, etc. You just immediately get fake data, which is enough for checking navigation. Uh, yes, if you because recently I did a big workshop, and the repository for this workshop will be a bit polished and published in a couple of weeks in Twitter, LinkedIn, at any of my accounts. So you will have possibility to check it, because during this workshop I cover this topic. So this information will be available, and probably also I will share a blog post about it with more details. But you
Great.
can use functional test with just multiple screens.
Rafał, we hope this answers your question. Now, the next one from Facebook is this one. Are there any official resources for Compose UI and fragments? Most examples I see are using activities or some workaround.
So to be honest, it's so what you can do. I have one of repositories in my GitHub which use fragments. So the main idea here is that it's not so important that you can have one activity. You can use traditional navigation component and have multiple fragments and add instead of layout for every fragment, add just Jetpack Compose code. So you will have multiple fragments, and every fragment just will have composable function, will execute composable functions. So from navigation perspective, you have just a lot of fragments, but from every screen perspective, you execute composable function on the fragment. If you have questions, please ping me on any social media where I am, LinkedIn, Twitter, and I will share more example with you.
Okay, and the next one. So if I understand it correctly, with the Jetpack, we have now a similar approach to Flutter, right?
Uh, Unfortunately, I don't know because I didn't use Flutter. So for me, it's hard to say. But so when you run your test case, you can run fragment, and inside fragment you can have composable function. You can run activity, and inside this activity composable function, or you can even add whole navigation graph to the composable function in test. And in this case, you will have multiple screens, all screens from your navigation graph. Of course, if you use uh, a fully Jetpack Compose application. But yeah, I hope it was helpful that I show which different methods we can run, how we can start activity, how we can start fragment, composable functions. So probably, yeah, it's kind of, if we talk about fully composed applications, it can be similar to Flutter, I assume.
Thank you so much, guys. We still have a few minutes left until we say goodbye to you. So if you have any questions, this is the moment to ask them, and I will show our speaker another one. I think this is the one we didn't show yet. Can I open later? Can I open my project later with the Canary version of Android Studio and replace the UI with Compose?
Yes, but you don't need to open Canary version of Android Studio because right now release version of Android Studio support Jetpack Compose. So I assume yes, you can open Canary version. The Canary version most probably will use the latest version, like beta or alpha version of the plugin, the Gradle plugin. But what you can do, you can just open in release version and replace some of your UI component with Jetpack Compose.
Okay, thank you so much. And then we have another question. It's pretty long, so just give me a moment. I'm creating a new project in Kotlin, so I think I make it using Jetpack Compose. So if I do so, then all libraries are available in Jetpack, or for currently I have to use I have to use MVVM. Your answer is very important and useful. Any thoughts on that?
Uh, so Usually, with Compose, many people prefer to use MVVM with or without a view model from Google libraries, or you can use MVI also as a pretty popular alternative. Both of these architecture you can implement without any specific libraries, so you can easily do it without them. But if you want to use completely Jetpack Compose for for some production application, you still should do some workarounds. because it's still not so stable. It still has some minor issues, and it's still you still need to do some workaround even for such simple application which I show as example. When you have multiple text fields on the screen, and after the text field, you click on the text field and you assume that your screen will be scrolled and your text field will be scrolled up a bit. It's not happening. You can do it, but with some way of workaround. So if you think about playing with Jetpack Compose, it's fine. I also like to do it. But if we talk about like, please don't think that starting from today it will be super stable, it will have super high performance. In some cases yes, in some cases not really, but it still will have some minor issues and you still will need to do some workaround to solve these problems. Maybe later on in next version a lot of them will be fixed, but right now in a one because I used a 1.2.0 latest alpha or beta version, it was still some issues. So I just want to let you know that it's still not like ideal. And when we talk views, it's very, you don't have many issues.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think this was the last question that our users actually submitted during your presentation. So thank you so much, Alex, for answering the questions, but also for your presentation, for sharing your knowledge and your experience. This is very valuable for us. And we hope this is our first, but not the last meeting during Techbite mobile meetups. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, guys, and be sure to check our socials. Be sure to check if we have any new events coming up, because there is so much more knowledge and experience that we want to share with you. So be with us on our social media accounts, and we hope to see you very, very soon. See you later, guys. Bye bye.
Bye bye.